Welcome to day 10. Here we go again. It's kind of late and I'm tired. And I'm back inside because it's actually quite cold outside. So my front porch is not a refuge right now. I do miss the chirping of the animals and the sounds of nature around me. But my voice is getting a little stronger. We're still not feeling the greatest in this home, but I know we're not the only ones out there fighting the crud. So prayers with all of us as we heal. I've been telling you a little bit about my journey with Jason this week because it is kind of a poignant week as I approach 22 years since he passed away tomorrow. Again, I want to emphasize I'm not trying to be too dramatic with this, or trust me, God has met me in so many ways that I just celebrate what he's done. I'm not trying to dig up these stories to be too dramatic about it all. However, I do like sharing because I feel like there's a lot of people out there who really just don't know me from that era, who just don't even really know what that was like. I wrote about it a lot in my book, The Great Undoing in My Journey Home, so feel free to check it out there. But one of the things that was very fascinating about that time was it really the weekend before Jason and I went to Vanderbilt again, where the tumor was actually re-diagnosed. We had flown to Philadelphia to visit my grandparents who were about to leave their home, the only home that I'd ever known them in. And we'd gone up there repeatedly and had these wonderful times visiting with them in this home we loved up on a hill. It was just magical. And we were supposed to have gone at Christmas, and we all got sick and had to postpone the trip and wait and go in May. So we had rescheduled the tickets for some reason, and it ended up landing only about a week before we were going back up to Vanderbilt for another MRI. For those of you who don't know, Jason originally had an MRI about a year after we married. And I should even back up. He was originally diagnosed before we met. He had radiation. They thought they had eradicated his tumor, and then he started having symptoms again about a year after we were married. I was graduating from Vanderbilt at the time, and so we stuck around in the Nashville area instead of me going on to get my master's at Arizona State. So we were closer to family here in the Southeast, and so we had a series of MRIs at that time, which was in 1991, and all of them were clear. So after about a year, they started backing them up to 6 months, every 6 months. And so we had both boys in this time. And it wasn't until about this time now, we can fast forward to 1994. It's May of 1994. Sam is 7 months old. Nathan is about just over 2.5. So we've flown up to Philadelphia to visit with my grandparents, and they have this park, and we went on this long walk in this park, and the boys were playing in a creek. And I just remember my grandmother and my mother kind of waving over to me, and these two women walked over, and they were nuns. And they had just felt like God had led them to pray for me. I think they'd asked my mom and grandmother how they felt I'd receive it at first. And then they came over and just prayed. And it just felt like they were supposed to reassure me that God was with me, that God was, in charge of our lives, or, it was all going to be okay or whatever, So I'm like, yes, we are going to get this MRI of the brain the next weekend and everything's fine. And I just remember getting out of the car that day and telling Jason in the Vanderbilt parking lot, boy, this just does not feel like a red letter day. It was just too pretty. Everything's good. And yet within hours, we're sitting in a windowless room and somebody's saying, we see growth and you have 2 to 3 years to live. So, we didn't really know how to absorb that, what to do with that. Jason had a PET scan. I went and met with a pastor. We were staying with some friends who believed in healing. And really, we just kept hearing the message of faith. Believe, 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 believe. Faith, it moves mountains. That whole 9 yards. And yet, as we really just dug into that, believing God for miracles, believing God to move, kind of like it kept an openness in our hearts the entire time that he was sick. Instead of the fear of losing him kind of caving in on both of us, it's like we had this openness. We had this place in us that had more space for God to move and to do his thing, for his love to transform us, to transform me. And that's the story, is that this very fearful, I believe with Jesus with all my heart, but I never wanted to spend the night by myself growing up. I didn't like it even as a young mom. And, I could not fathom being left without him. My family even kind of felt that he was my interpreter. Like Jason was just this unique individual who God gave me for a period of time to kind of help me get to know myself in ways I just didn't even know existed, honestly, within me. I mean, that's kind of the blessing of it. But it was crazy to me to just how God put those nuns in that place, that even when the message was, hey, he's terminal, there was like this hope. He whispered hope the whole time. And that's what he's been doing since the garden. God's been writing this story of hope in the midst of all this awful that's been happening. He started it with Abraham. He whispered, hey, pull out. Hey, come to the promised land. I got something else for you. He whispered it to the Israelites. He whispered it to Jacob, Isaac, the 12 tribes. He whispered it to David, even Solomon, on and on, even in the silent years where the prophets weren't speaking, the 400 years before Jesus came. I bet there were individuals in their hearts who were hearing that whisper somehow. And God kept whispering to us through that whole time that Jason was terminal. He kept whispering, I'm here and I'm bigger and I see you and I'm for you. And that brought me to the place where when on November 2nd, 1996, it was obvious that Jason's breathing had changed and we need to kind of settle him, either take him to the ER or try to get some drugs. He's the one who shook his head and said, I'm not going to the hospital. And so someone was able to run off. His sister, who's a nurse, was able to go get some morphine and brought it back and administered it. And that kind of started a long wait that happened the next day. But there had been so much hope, quiet, beautiful hope, loud moments. One of my favorites, I'm going to end with this tonight, is to say that I was thinking about this earlier, that I'd had a series of things lead us to attend a faith healing conference in Jacksonville, Florida. And I can't remember exactly when it was, but it was maybe about a year and a half. Jason was not doing the greatest, but he was still able to kind of walk on his own. But we walked in and I had really felt like God had said, I have something for you. In fact, I'd had a vision of like lightning or just fireworks. I think I'd thought it was fireworks. And so we go to this conference and we were there for several days. Really didn't have anything major happen. On the last day, at the last presentation, the last sermon that was going to be given, we were in this huge auditorium in Jacksonville, Florida, and there's praise and worship going on. And this is, these people are radical about their expression of faith. So hands are in the air. People are singing. No one is shying away from their expression of God's goodness. And all of a sudden, we knew there was rain. You could hear the rain hitting the roof. But, and you could hear the lightning, and I was looking at Jason going, Jason, lightning, fireworks, this is it. Something's got to be about to happen. I was all excited. And all of a sudden, there's like this sound of a train. I remember thinking, I think there's a train overhead. Well, and then a quarter, a third, a large portion of the roof was torn off the building. It was a tornado. A tornado had come into Jacksonville and came right over this Coliseum. And the woman who was standing in the stage just stood up and rebuked that tornado, the entire place. What got me the most was that room full of believers stood on their feet and they just prayed. No one ran. No one screamed in fear. No one budged. We stood up. In fact, it was reported later, or maybe she commented to us later, that the people who ran the Coliseum were just stunned that a room full of people like that nobody freaked out, that we were orderly, we were calm. But it was kind of like there was just this energy called faith in that room that said, we are overcomers and we're going to be okay. And it was reported in the newspaper the next day that tornado stopped overhead that Coliseum. I don't know that I have been in a room of believers where if a tornado came overhead, that group would stand and pray and believe. I'm not even sure if I'm always that person. Sometimes I get a little bit worn down these days, so I don't want to act like I'm so big either. But that's something about that just kept saying to me, there's more to this walk. There's a boldness intended in our walk. There's something about those scriptures when we get them inside of us. We are meant to be more. So I want to leave you tonight with that rallying cry. Just even for myself, one more time, Lord, I just don't want to give to fear. I give way too much room to fear in my life. Lord, we have so much anxiety and fear in our lives right now. Lord, and would you help us be bold believers who are willing to be the ones who stand up and say, no more. God, move, empower us as your people. May our faith move mountains. Alrighty, that's day 10. It's a wrap.